All right. Hello, everybody. I am Cheese Slice. I am the engineer producer of Uncontrolled Opposition. I'm welcome to the show today. We're going to be talking to Fiorella and Vanessa Beeley about the multipolar world and whether or not they think it's real or not. They've done a lot of analysis on this topic. But first, I just want you to know, if you've never watched the show before, this is a radio program where we are recording for a radio show. So this is just a live version of that where you get to see everything uncut. So let's go ahead and bring on our host today, Jeremy and Gloria. How are you guys doing today?
Hey, Jamie.
All
Hey,
right.
Jeremy.
Great to see you. And I think we got a good one planned. So we're going to go ahead and bring on our guests, Vanessa and Fiorella. How are you guys doing?
Hey, ladies.
And we are going to start right now. I'm going to hand it off to Gloria, and let's have a great show, everybody.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Uncontrolled Opposition, where together we battle mind wars with truth strikes. I'm Gloria Guillo, an investigative journalist, and I'm here with my co-host, Professor Jeremy Kuzmarov, managing editor of Covert Action magazine. Our producer and engineer is Jamie Cheeslice. The opinions you hear are ours and that of our guests, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. This content is intended for informational and educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as professional or legal advice. Listeners are encouraged to form their own opinions. Today's guests are Fiorella Isabel and Vanessa Beeley. They are world-class investigative journalists and activists focused on geopolitics. They are here to unpack the role played by Russia and China in relation to Gaza, Syria, and Venezuela. On January 3rd, in a late-night raid, U.S. forces stormed Caracas and took Nicolas Maduro, the president, and his wife prisoner. As the reasons for doing so became glaringly invalid with the disclosure of their indictment and President Trump's own admission that it's all about oil, alternate motives are coming into focus. And as predicted, they have nothing to do with drugs and terrorist networks. As many now know, Venezuela sits on the largest oil reserve on the planet, more than Saudi Arabia. For years, Venezuela has been selling its oil in Chinese yuan, rubles, and euros, anything but US dollars. In 2018, Venezuela openly declared they were freeing themselves from the US dollar. They built direct payment channels with China that bypassed the SWIFT transactional system entirely. They sought to join BRICS, and with that much oil behind them, their entry could supercharge global de-dollarization. On January 5th, Edmundo Gonzalez, the former CIA asset and losing candidate in the 2024 election, was recognized by the United States as the president of Venezuela. And one of his first acts was to withdraw Venezuela's application to BRICS. So this is really about the survival of the petrodollar system itself and the continued bailout of the U.S. economy through the illegal seizure, otherwise known as theft and piracy, of foreign assets and resources. For clarity, let's go back to 1974. Under Richard Nixon, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, he cut a deal with the Saudi Arabia that all oil trades would be priced and settled in US dollars, and in return, America would provide military protection. That agreement created permanent artificial demand for the dollar. Every nation needs dollars to buy energy, so America can print trillions while the rest of the world works to earn them. It funds the deficits, the military, everything. Challenge that system, and the pattern is brutal and consistent. In 2000, Saddam Hussein announced Iraq would sell oil in euros. 2003, invaded, regime changed, oil immediately switched back to dollars. No weapons of mass destruction were ever found because the weapons were never the issue. In 2009, Muammar Gaddafi pushes a gold-backed African dinar for oil trade across the continent. Hillary Clinton's own leaked emails confirm this was the primary motive for intervention. In 2011, NATO bombs Libya into chaos. Gaddafi is murdered, the gold dinar dies with him. Now Maduro, with 5 times more oil than Iraq and Libya combined, actively trading in yuan, partnering with Russia, China, and Iran. the three countries leading the charge away from the dollar. This is the third time in 25 years the empire has used direct military force against a leader who threatened petrodollar hegemony. The excuses change: weapons of mass destruction, humanitarian intervention, narco-terrorism, but the pattern never does. And the petrodollar is already cracking. Russia sells in rubles and yuan. Saudi Arabia is discussing yuan settlements. Iran has been off dollar for years. China's system now connects almost 5,000 banks in nearly 200 countries. The BRICS Bridge CBDC project lets central banks bypass SWIFT and settle instantly in local currencies. If Venezuela joins BRICS with its 300 billion barrels behind it, it would accelerate the dollar's collapse. Consider that Venezuela's admission to BRICS was slated for July 2026, just 6 months away. Sounds like the US had a major time imperative. So on January 3rd, 36 years, almost to the day after the Panama invasion, the helicopters came again. While Russia, China, and Iran denounced the U.S. violation of international law against a sovereign country with its bombing campaign and kidnapping, they took no military action. BRICS members watched in horror as a member in waiting gets regime changed for trading outside the dollar. The message to the global south is crystal clear. Step away from the dollar and U.S. Special Forces, tools for the corrupt Federal Reserve System and ExxonMobil, will land on your roof at 3 a.m. But here's the irony. Invasions like this don't save a dying system. They expose them. When you have to bomb countries to force them to use your currency, the currency has already lost the economic argument. The petrodollar isn't being defended. It's being given last rites. President Maduro's imprisonment won't stop dollar de-dollarization. At best, it will only slow it down. The weaponization of the dollar is coming to an end, whether Washington wants to admit it or not. Thank you. We are very pleased to welcome back to our show Fiorella Isabel, and thrilled she has brought Vanessa Beeley with her today. We are great fans of Vanessa's work as well. Ladies, before diving into geopolitics with China and Russia as it pertains to Gaza, Syria, and Venezuela, please start by telling our audience about your vast personal experience in the Mideast, Latin America, and Eastern Europe. Thank you.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'll keep it very, very brief. I mean, basically, since 2012,
we have Vanessa Beeley speaking.
Oh, sorry. I've spent the majority of my time in the Middle East, starting in 2012 in Gaza. I entered Gaza through the tunnels, and I stayed there during the Zionist aggression of 2012 and went back in 2013 for a period of time to work on basically, then it was more activism projects. That then developed into an interest in what was going on in Syria and Egypt conjunctly. And 2016 was the first time that I managed to get into Syria with a US peace delegation. I was the only Brit on the delegation. And from 2016, pretty much up until 2019, I was working on the ground on the majority of the front lines inside Syria, reporting to counter the mainstream narratives that, of course, were designed to bring about the regime change that eventually did happen in December 2024. From 2019 until the fall of Damascus, I was actually living in Syria. I'm now still in the region, living in Beirut in Lebanon.
And a lot of you have known me, at least on this channel and on Gloria's audience, but I'm Fiorella Isabel, and I started actually learning about journalism in college and got a degree in communications, particularly PR and English writing. But then I went into it more so in Los Angeles due to just the levels of economic disarray there, and of course the political coming of the Bernie Sanders illusion that I think really shaped the actual devastation that we see today, the lack of cohesion. Through that, I got into U.S. elections and into how the United States controls elections and coups and regime changes throughout the world. Went to Nicaragua, Honduras, interviewed people coming through the border in Los Angeles, went to Peru, have seen the election of and re-election of very important figures, have interviewed now the director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, and just a key amount of other figures that are interesting in the development, not just of the United States, but of the foreign policy of the United States, which we know affects pretty much everything we do. I then went to Russia and obviously was on the ground in Russia and went to Donbass, have been to Crimea, have interviewed so many people working for RT, and I am now independent. And I think independent journalism is really where it's at. It's where I can do the most truthful type of journalism and investigation, and I'm happy to be here with you all today.
Thank you. Do you want to start with a particular country? You want to start with Gaza and work outward, or what do you ladies want to do?
Well, let's hear their view on Venezuela and the Russian role or lack of support for Venezuela's government, or disappointment maybe.
Yeah, Vanessa, why don't you go ahead?
Well, I mean, my experience is not as great as V's in Venezuela and in Latin America. I think for Venezuela, the biggest shock was what happened in Syria, when it was clear to people on the ground that while Russia had not necessarily brought about the final failure of the Syrian government and the Syrian Arab Army, but there was some element of collusion, which has since been spoken about by Jolani, or Ahmed al-Sharaa, that people now know him as the HTS al-Qaeda president, unelected president of Syria, who's now conducting his own form of genocide and ethnic cleansing in Syria since he was brought to power by the Western imperialist alliance and, of course, the Zionist bloc. By the Zionist bloc, what do I mean? I mean Israel and the Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE, all of which were created by the British actually as outreach agents for the Zionist entity. At the same time that the Zionist entity was created by the British, they were effectively turning Saudi Arabia into what is a Wahhabi state, which produces terrorism that is then deployed by the Western imperialist alliance, including the US, UK, and EU, globally to carry out their various destabilization and regime change campaigns. So we can get into more detail about Syria, but one of the embassies in Syria was, of course, the Venezuelan embassy, because Venezuela has always been an integral part of the entire resistance axis across the world of independent anti-imperialist peoples who also support the justice for the Palestinians and a one state of Palestine, not a two state of Palestine, which of course we can come on to regarding Russia and China. And so I think when Syria fell, it was a very big awakening for the members of BRICS who are also part of the resistance axis, so namely Iran, and as you said, Venezuela is a member in waiting. Interesting that actually Brazil blocked their inclusion in BRICS, and again, we can talk more about that. And so I think the expectations from Venezuela regarding Russia were much lower after the fall of Syria anyway, for various reasons, because they understood to a degree the collusion between Russia and Israel, the potential for there having been a deal as soon as Trump was clearly going to be elected. There were very obviously back-channel conversations between Putin's close circle and Trump's close circle, and the high potential that a deal was done to effectively release any big influence over Syria. And what we're seeing now, of course, since Syria fell, is Russia's collaboration with Israel. Israel very early on was lobbying the United States and Trump for Russia to actually keep its bases in Syria. Sorry, I'm coming to Venezuela in a kind of long-winded way, because I think understanding what happened in Syria from a Venezuelan perspective is also very important. So I think anyway, their expectations were lowered when there was a lot of hype about Russia supplying weapons and sending in defense contractors and advisors. I'm still in touch with the Venezuela ambassador who was in Syria, and now he's ambassador of Syria and Venezuela, but Maduro has not yet recognized the Al-Qaeda government in Syria. And he basically told me, look, Vanessa, whatever weapons we have in Venezuela, we bought them anyway, just as we would buy them from anyone else. This isn't some kind of altruistic gesture by Russia. And a lot of the weapons were already in Venezuela from even decades ago. I mean, the 5,000 man-pad anti-aircraft missiles that they had are very, really basic equipment. They're only really capable of, I think, a range of around 3 to 6 kilometers. So they're only ever going to bring down drones or helicopters. And from the video footage that we saw, there wasn't much evidence of any air defense usage. And of course, coming back to Syria again, because there's huge parallels between what happened in Venezuela and what happened in Syria. Russia claimed to have supplied the S-300s to Syria. At the same time, they were having pressure put upon them by Israel to not supply the S-300s. So the compromise, to some degree, I think, retrospectively looking at it, Russia supplied the S-300s, but they didn't supply the training. So the S-300s were effectively sitting there, and they were never used in anger by the Syrian army. Many of us who at the time were still supporting Russia's role in Syria were saying, well, maybe they're keeping them until there's a major escalation with Israel. But again, in retrospect, effectively no training was given, and the S-300s that were there were not used. And Russia certainly, as regards the attacks on Syria by Israel, was informed in advance and stood down. And so therefore, this is commentary that has been put out both by former Syrian military, by Iranian commanders, that the collaboration with Israel in Syria was extensive with Russia. And it wasn't sort of back channel. It was very open. I've said this before, between 2015, when Russia actually entered the war in Syria, and 2021, there was something like 49 phone calls between Netanyahu and Putin. And Putin consistently kept Israel in the loop of what he was doing in Syria. And he was aligned with Israel in the sense that he wanted to exclude Iranian influence in Syria. So I that is a very long-winded way of looking at it. But there are, I think, huge parallels between Venezuela and Syria. And the final point I will make, what is interesting is that President Putin, in his first statement after the fall of Syria, basically blamed everything on the surrender of the Syrian Arab army. And that's exactly the narrative that we're now seeing in Venezuela. This narrative, why should we fight if they're not going to fight? And Fia and I were talking about this. We're seeing this same narrative roll out. I can categorically say, as someone that was on the ground during those last days in Syria, the Syrian Arab army kept fighting until Homs. Even the most recent documentary that's been issued by the Al-Qaeda media channels actually talks about the fierce resistance that the Syrian army put up, both in Aleppo, in Hama, in the surrounding countryside, in Homs. But they were betrayed both externally and internally, and they were left in complete disarray. They were being wiped out by drone and artillery fire, and Russia was absolutely not bombing anything. I keep saying, if you look at the images of the empty road, flat territory from Aleppo to Hama, and there were massive HTS convoys heading to Hama, there was no bombing of those convoys. and Russia was in the sky at that point. It bombed one bridge in Homs, and then it went back to Khaimimim. In Aleppo, the Russian forces were met head-on by the Iranian forces coming to provide reinforcements for the Syrian army. And the head of the Russian forces said, forget it, we're going back to Khaimimim. So what I find very interesting is immediately this narrative was pushed out from regarding Venezuela, that effectively there was inside betrayal. They didn't do anything to protect their president. Now, as more details come out, of course, we're discovering there was huge resistance from the Cuban special forces, from the Venezuela military. There was, according again to Jose Biomogui, the ambassador here in Lebanon, there was treason to some degree at mid-level military, but it wasn't widespread. Right. So there was no surrender. The president was, the president's wife was injured and the president was injured. So they didn't surrender. They were taken by force. But what I find interesting is almost this justification for no military action, particularly by Russia, is being rolled out again. And it's amazing how that gathers traction and how it then becomes very difficult to push back against it. I still, every day, get people telling me, but the Syrian army surrendered. What should Russia have done? You know, so that's where I see the important similarities between what happened in Venezuela and what happened previously in Syria.
Well, what do you think the Russian interest, as far as this Russian-Israeli line? Because, I mean, Russia has a lot of stakes. As you pointed out, the military bases, I mean, maybe they're trying to negotiate with new governments to keep those bases, but what was the Russian state interest as far as its alliance with Israel?
But they've had a long-standing alliance with Israel. I mean, this isn't something relatively new. Putin has an emotional attachment to the Jewish faith. That's been made very clear even in his own statements. The existence of Chabad Lubavitch, which has a powerful influence in Russia, it's one of the outreach agencies, one of the most powerful, I think 5,000 emissaries globally, effectively expanding Israeli influence, Zionist influence. Pax Judaica, which clearly seems to be coming to the fore right now. And I think Russia, it has more than 1 million Jewish Israelis, of course, in Israel, some of which are fighting in the IOF. The relationship between Israel and Russia has always been overtly a partnership. And we knew in Syria, and certainly the resistance here, nobody here in this region expects anything, by the way, from Russia or China, just to make that very clear. They're very aware of the limitations of any kind of partnership with Russia or China. They don't expect an ideological partnership. And in my humble opinion, the mistake that President Assad made and some members of his government made was to believe there was a historical ideological partnership between them and Russia. And unfortunately, and again, as Fia and I always say, we don't blame Russia for this. We don't blame China for looking after their own interests. My problem is with people who put Russia and China onto some kind of savior pedestal and they have and claim that they have this sort of deep anti-imperialist slant to their foreign policies. I don't agree with that. I think Russia and China will do with what is in the interests of Russia and China. And that's why you saw Russia being one of the first to normalize relations with HTS, as you said, to protect their base on the coast of Syria, which gives them access to Africa without dependency on Turkey. If they had lost that base, they would lose their strategic position in the Middle East, which straddles in Syria, which straddles two of the main economic corridors, entering from Turkey and entering from Iraq. So it was incredibly important for Russia to keep that foothold for its interests in Africa, its interests in exporting resources to Europe, eventually, I guess, once the war in Ukraine is kind of settled, and just to maintain a footprint in the Middle East, because had they lost Syria, And that's historically why Russia had the base in Syria. It didn't just happen in the last 10 years. They've been there for 60 years. So in my opinion, it was incredibly important. At the time, it was very important for them to keep Iranian influence to a minimum level inside Syria and to extend their interests in the Middle East. And now they're doing it with collaboration, clear collaboration with Israel.
Yeah, and if I could add, I think your analysis is definitely on the mark. And yeah, I see that on some segments of the left, they tend to not only idealize the foreign policy of Russia and China and make like they're these moral countries. I mean, countries are not moral agents, whether it's the U.S., Russia, or China. And then they also idealize those societies internally, and they make like, China is a utopia or something. I mean, there are a lot of good things that have happened in China, but there are also a lot of repressive aspects that they just kind of sideline. So, and same with Russia. I mean, they kind of, I don't know, that's just my opinion, but I think you have very good analysis. So, I don't know, Fiorella, if you want to weigh in as far as the situation in Syria.
No, Vanessa is the go-to person that
sorry, I meant Venezuela. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean, she's absolutely right about the parallels. There's also parallels with Panama, as Gloria mentioned in her opening monologue. But what I really want to focus on is this idea of having saviors to begin with, and a lot of this is coming from Western commentators, Western analysts, Western journalists, this idea that, Russia and China are going to come in and save us. And it's not just saving Venezuela or saving Syria, it's saving literally America. And I think, since this is an American audience largely, we do need to get that out of our system. Like, nobody is going to save you. And this whole savior mentality, we can go back to pretty much any politician in the last few years, including Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump's pivot towards Latin America is not surprising. Myself, Vanessa, Craig, we all said that Trump was going to pivot towards Latin America and West Asia because the Republican Party tends to do that. And they tend to be more covert about it, while the Democrats are more, they tend to be more overt, while the Democrats are more covert. And what we've seen here, especially after Syria and after Gaza, is they no longer need to hide who they are or what they do. They say, we're going to take the oil, we're going to take it. They say, we're going to go get you. They go get you. I mean, there's nothing that is being hidden. And a lot of these relationships that Vanessa mentioned between Russia and Israel and even China and Israel, right? Because China still, to this day, is still trading with Israel. Israel is a major consumer for China. And a lot of people just simply don't talk about that, which to me, it signals a huge blind spot, because as stated, we're not blaming them for anything. We can understand that Russia and China need to do what they need to do for Russia and China, for the people, for their national interests. And when you look at the policies of these two powers, they're very powerful nations. They really focus on diplomacy, on trading, on economic partnerships and cooperation. This is everything that they talk about. It. When I was in Russia, and I still go, I'm going back to Russia still. The focus is always on cooperation. It's always on working with literally everybody. So they've never excluded somebody based on an ideological stance. They're not an ideological nation. And I think people still don't understand what that means. It is a very pragmatic way of functioning. It is, we're going to do this if it helps our interests. We won't do it if it doesn't. And it's simple and it's fine. And I think Vanessa said it really well. What bothers me is people just creating ideas that are in fantasy and calling it analysis and saying that this is, the reality is they're going to come. And I saw it was Venezuela. When everything was happening with Venezuela, people were saying, Russia and China are going to come in and they're going to start a war with the United States. And even now, with the confrontation, let's call it, between the United States and Russia over the the military ship that was there, I still see Russia's reaction being extremely far, even too diplomatic by their own supporters. They're being called out for being far too diplomatic, and you have to look at everything that's happening in the context too of Russia Ukraine, because as we've known since last year, there's been an attempt to have these conversations between the United States and Russia. But in these conversations that go back to February, I think the conversations have centered around economic trade, economic partnerships, potential resource extraction in the Arctic, potential minerals in the Donbass. The United States is actually very interested in working with Russia and getting access to these minerals. That's the whole, like, Ukraine sits on really rich soil, and the Donbass is a huge portion of that. Russia has largely untapped resources. It is a gigantic amount of territory, spanning more than 9 time zones, and a lot of it has yet to be developed. So the United States' interest in Russia, I think now, seeing how it's positioned itself, how it's been able to militarily destroy Ukraine in those ways, because that is undeniable, I think, at this point, how it has been able to rise above, and also this sort of connection between the traditional values of Russia and the traditional values of that Trump has been pushing, right? This sort of camaraderie that they've found has enabled a relationship that didn't exist before, and has enabled these conversations to take place in a way that I have not seen, to the point of where I'm getting that there's going to be a reinstatement of Russian media in the United States, that there's going to be a reinstatement of American companies in Russia, that this is what is happening now. And the majority of analysis when it comes to Russia, Ukraine, it is saying that this isn't going to happen. But when I look at what's going on in Venezuela, and when I see that China and Russia condemn the US actions and talk about supporting national sovereignty, but simultaneously don't involve themselves, this is just the way they are, and the way they function, and the way they're going to continue to function, because the overall world where we're heading at now in the more macro context is a world that functions based on economic desires, economic interests, and global capital. You cannot tell me, and it's even maybe irrelevant, that China is operating under communism, because it is clearly a very key player in the capitalist global trade market. I mean, it is a major player. It is the one foe the United States is truly looking at. And to me, it seems like the United States is trying to build this whole block in South America, in Latin America in general, in order to be able to compete with China. And Russia, as a very powerful nation, you can bring in India to that, you can bring in even the majority of BRICS countries. They are also going to compete in a global market if they have enough assets and enough money and power to have a seat at the table. But the reality is that BRICS itself is not some sort of different just type of paradigm. It is basically going from a unilateral to a dual or trilateral, or even if you call it multipolar power structure, where the most powerful now have a seat at the table. Perhaps it's no longer just the United States. And, you know, even though they're pushing the Don Roe doctrine, as people are calling it now, it's not just the United States and Europe. Now it's going to include the United States, Russia, China. What you don't see is an automatic equity. What you will not see is people paying mind to, in actually strong effort, to what's happening to Palestinians in Gaza, even now as they face a harsh winter. What's happened to Syrians, and right now as they face still the repercussions of this invasion by these jihadist forces and in coalition with Israel and Turkey. And this is what makes it all possible for the United States to go in and kidnap Maduro, injure him and his wife, kill the Cuban security forces that were protecting him, kill others that were protecting Maduro, bomb a science. I think it was an area that had scientific Venezuelan
Kidney hospital, no?
hospital.
There was a kidney hospital.
There's a kidney hospital, but there was also a science type of hall that they also bombed as well, and get away with it. Because guess what? After a genocide of children and innocent people, and we didn't stop that. There was only, we condemn this by the UN. Of course, after Syria fell and it was toppled the way so quickly, of course, this is going to be easy to do, because now we have set a precedent where this can happen to anybody. And the thing with Venezuela that I want to highlight is Venezuela is, yes, full of resources, particularly oil, but also Venezuela represents a very resistance-like minded spirit, similar to what we see in West Asia, a mentality that relies on history, on faith, on a very altruistic ideological type of unity that is rooted, of course, in economic freedom and national sovereignty, and that is extremely defiant. And that type of mentality in the world that we're facing, when we talk about global capitalism, this global rat race for resources, that is an actual detriment to that mentality. Right. It is just diametrically opposed to that mentality. So what you're seeing is the eradication of that resistance, or the attempt to eradicate it, to diminish it and to destroy it by the West, yes, but also to kind of look the other way from those who are also trying to get a piece of the gigantic global pie. And for me, people might say, oh, this is a negative viewpoint, but it's not, because I am looking exactly at what's happened. Bolivia is gone. Chile is fully gone. I mean, we're talking about Zionist, pro-Zionist, fully far right, like paramilitary far right takeovers in Latin America. We're talking about Colombia in danger, Mexico also threatened, Nicaragua threatened, and Venezuela, again, in a very vulnerable position, though the removal of Maduro, by the way, did not kill Bolivarianism. Everything that Donald Trump has done has actually produced a backlash, even with the Venezuelan opposition. And I can talk even further about that, because that's definitely happened a lot. And that is a hope in Venezuela, that I think, the removing of one leader, the same way we saw after the president of Iran was killed, doesn't necessarily mean the downfall of the entire thing. And there's hope to that, but there's also an understanding of how things are and how dire things are, and this reality that we're facing is actually a fight in the very, very gigantic macro sense of good versus evil. Yeah, but it's not as clear cut or in a Hollywood type of Marvel superhero way that people look at it. It's a lot more nuanced. It's more like Game of Thrones. And I've said this in my conversations with Vanessa, where everybody is guilty, where everybody has their, this sort of gray area that they're operating in. And it's not this ideological way that people are viewing things as heroes and villains.
And it's not the era of the Cold War, where you have at that time, the Soviet Union was heavily ideological and perhaps committed to anti-imperialism, whereas the current Russian leadership, and maybe that was my question for either Vanessa or Fiorella, as far as your assessment of the internal politics within Russia, and that Putin may be more in the accommodationist wing, that his goal, even when he first came in, was to forge good relation with the U.S., that he sees a lot of opportunity in that alliance, and that he has often been very accommodating and faced criticism within Russia. So maybe you can comment on that, unless Gloria has another question.
I would just like to add to it that there's a lot of noise out there that some kind of deals were cut in lieu of a World War III. There were some deals made. Hey, you get this part of the hemisphere. Hey, you get that part of the hemisphere. And that's just the word on the street. Other things that's kind of on the street is that there's a tremendous psyop going on, that the United States can do anything and get away with anything. And, you hear, oh, the U.S. forces are so fantastic, they could do anything. And then there's these other psyops saying that Venezuela is completely compromised. And, there's all of these things that try to make resistance feel ineffective. And I think it's very important for us, also to kind of debunk the psyops and to call them what they are. They're just ways to try to disempower, an enemy from a political standpoint. And right now, Venezuela is united. And right now, they've identified one individual who seems to have let the guard down, who was compromised, but the government seems intact. The people are completely behind the government, and the things that Donald Trump are saying seem to be extremely almost funny in a way that they're so wrong and so clearly wrong. So I think that's something also to put out there, ladies. Thanks.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly answer Jeremy, and then I'll let Vanessa start tackling that. But but it's just when it comes to Russia, like after having lived there, it's not a monolith. And I'll say that, you have a difference between, for example, Vasily Nebenzia, UN representative, and how he has been vocal against Gaza and how he has been vocal against what happened in Venezuela. And then you have Kirill Dmitriev, who seems rather supportive of Donald Trump's foreign policy. And you don't have to, you can just go to his X account and look at what he's posted. And you can see that he's quite, supportive of Donald Trump's policies, of the entire politics of the Trump administration. He constantly talks about the problem with immigration. He talks about, how the potential indicated how the potential between the United States and Venezuela working together could be a positive thing. He, really, really goes after the EU, which I understand because the EU is, a mess and all of that. But it does seem kind of like, in a way, trying to cultivate a very bro relationship with Donald Trump. And this is nothing new. This happened. He has cultivated this relationship, not just with Trump, but Jared Kushner and with the entire elite in that world, as well as with, he worked with McKenzie, Prince Tarek. I mean, he has had his hands in a lot of really high, powerful places. And this is a guy that is Putin's go-to guy, along with, of course, I guess the counter would be Stephen Witkoff, who has been having these meetings. And through him, you'll see like that this scenario is going. So when you talk about, the Soviet Union, absolutely not. Russia is no longer the Soviet Union. I mean, there are elements left in education, in healthcare, where they do get a massively reduced, if not free, education and healthcare. But apart from that, it's a very capitalist-driven society, especially in Moscow, especially when it comes to how people view Europe. For example, Russians for the longest time wanted to go to Europe, wanted to live in Europe. They've always had these ideals about America and Europe and the United States and all of that. And I don't think that changed overnight with the Russia-Ukraine war. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of wealth in Moscow. Things do function. Putin did get rid initially of a lot of the oligarchs, but there's still a lot of elite left that, he can't and does not control. And increasingly, you are seeing, the more you're in Moscow, you see that disparity as well. And the further you get from Moscow, the more into the rural areas you get into, there's more of a sense of that old Soviet understanding. There's more of that sense of we're in the Donbass because we're going to fight the Nazis. So it's not a monolithic place at all. I mean, you have different ethnic groups as well, and the differences in those ethnic groups that are more Asian or are Muslim, rather than what you see as the Slavic, blonde-haired person that is in Moscow. So it's really hard to, I don't like to just say Russia is this, but it is not the Soviet Union. And I think a lot of anti-imperialists have forgotten that just because Putin is, speaking against what the EU and NATO are doing, just because Russia has really taken that role and gone after them, understandably so, that it doesn't mean that they're doing it just on an ideological basis, if at all. In fact, it is my opinion that, if that was the case, they would have gone into the Donbass years ago, before 14,000 people were killed. And that was the criticism of the more left-leaning Communist Party of Russia, that Putin didn't go in sooner. And the reason he didn't go in is because they didn't feel they were ready. And that's a very pragmatic decision. They wanted to go in at the right time. And so this isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think Russia did need some sort of realistic, on the ground, down to earth type of policies after the fall of the Soviet Union. But again, there is this naivety of working with the United States. And my fear is that in opening up those doors, it is not going to go well in the long run for Russia. I'm not against peace. I am for peace fully, but I want real peace. And I don't see the intentions of the United States, with Russia's vast resources and vast undeveloped terrain, to be anything good on that level.
The United States regularly breaks all its treaties. So, what are you going to do?
Yeah, Israel learned from the masters, whether it's British or American. There's a lot to go at there. Thanks, Fee. You've just sort of raised another whole lot of topics, as always. One thing I wanted to address, somebody pointed out in the comments that I used to be quite idealistic. I wouldn't say about China, but about Russia's role in Syria. And I do want to address this because to some degree it's true. And why is that? One, because geopolitics isn't stagnant. It's not static. It's always moving. And one thing that I've said recently, you will see in the world we're living in right now, which in my opinion, in my view, is a multipolar, transnational ruling elite turf war, right? It's a globalist, capitalist competition right now for resources, economic corridors, territory, water, one of the most important things, even more important right now than oil or rare earth minerals. There's a reason that China has something between 87% and 90% of the rare earth mineral market, both the mining and the processing. What is that doing to the planet? What is the military-industrial complex doing to the planet? It's destroying it. What is China's expansive fishing policy doing to the planet? It's destroying ecology. When people talk about, I'm not going to get into climate change because I believe, like many of these subjects, that's been weaponized to basically create divide and conquer tactics by governments involved in it. And we're going to bring in Agenda 2030 and all the rest of it. But nevertheless, it is a reality when a country's expansion is not taking into account ecology, environment, and populations and communities in the countries where it's expanding. And it's important to I'll come back to Russia in a second. It's important to understand how China manages to do this. It does it through the financial input from its population, who are forced pretty much to save 40% of their salaries. That goes into savings accounts, which, by the way, doesn't give them a great return because the interest rates are lower than actual inflation. But what that enables, it's a captured economy. So what that enables the government to do is to subsidize Chinese companies to expand competitively in the world today. So in my opinion, this is global capitalism. This is like outreach for China, and that's to be expected. Again, we're back to this issue as people anthropomorphize, I've said that all wrong, China and Russia, turning them into these kind of ideologues that are standing against imperialism. Not necessarily. They'll come into competition with the Western Hemisphere when it challenges their own financial interests, their economic interests, as it is now doing in Latin America, because China has invested billions into Venezuela, but also entirely in Latin America. It has ongoing projects to counter, for example, the importance of the Panama Canal, to create road and rail connections for various resource countries in Latin America. So it's challenging the US in its own backyard, in the US sphere of influence. And that is very much what I think we're going to be seeing right now in Syria. The chances are you're going to see Russia come into alignment, although it's partnered with Israel in many respects. It's going to come into alignment with France and Turkey, because Russia doesn't actually, it wants to see Syria as under UN Resolution 2254 that Russia always pushed, where they wanted a centralized government, but to have autonomous regions in Syria that are still kind of funneled into the central government, but have a degree of autonomy. Israel wants complete federalization, so does Washington. France wants the same thing as Russia, and Turkey to some degree will compromise and have some kind of non-federalized Syria. Of course, Turkey ideally wants all of Syria under its control. I mean, Syria now became, as it always was, the kind of intersection of global power interests, right? So if you actually look at what's happening in Syria, in my opinion, it kind of radiates out, and it enables you to understand what's going on externally as well. But up until 2018, remember that I was working on the ground in Syria, both with the military, with the intelligence on both sides, Russia and Syria, also in contact with Iranian officials and spending time in Tehran. And I have to say, as Fee said, this isn't a monolith. Russia isn't just one policy forging ahead. There's going to be division within the Kremlin. There's going to be division between the Kremlin and the military. And I know that for a fact. There are members of the former military that were there until 2018 that oppose the Kremlin policy in Syria and what happened. There are diplomats that oppose what happened in Syria. And up until 2018, there were really very good Syria-centric people from Russia inside Syria. And one of the heads of the intelligence operations there actually told me in 2017, we're going the wrong way in Syria. So yes, I idealized them to the point where at that point they were doing a good job. From 2018 onwards, it became very clear, and I actually wrote about this even for RT, and I was quite surprised that they published it. They made a lot of mistakes. Like, for example, when the South was liberated, Russia created a military division, the 5th Corps under the 8th Brigade, which was under the control of the Russians, made up of all the kind of disparate armed groups. Now, that armed group, interestingly enough, was the first one to enter Damascus when it fell. It wasn't Jolani and HTS. It was the Russian instructed armed groups that entered Damascus first and actually took President Assad out. And the other thing, when we talk about ideology, you know, Russia and President Putin have always presented themselves as representing conservative values, representing Christian values, community, family, in opposition to the West's complete destabilization of community, their policy of division, their policy of sectarianism, whether it's in Syria, and now, of course, it's coming into America, the EU, and the UK. It's being deliberately engineered to eventually bring Western populations into civil war, in my opinion, exactly as they have done in West Asia. when you look at those values that they claim to represent, both China and Russia to some degree, of course, China isn't supporting Christianity, but Russia has made a big deal about supporting Christianity. I haven't heard a peep from them about the persecution of the Christian communities that literally fought alongside them up until December 2024. Where are the statements? Where are the condemnations? There aren't any. Right? And this is kind of shocking to me, because a lot of the time that I spent in the last few years on the front lines, because the Christian towns in northern Hama, southern Idlib, were still under attack until around 2020. Now, they were heavily dependent on Russia at that point. They've effectively been abandoned. So for me, what does this mean? This means that ideology is just a political stance. And if we take that idea and look at Gaza and look at Yemen, you've mentioned Gaza, but you've not mentioned Yemen, which is very important also how Russia and China have acted towards Yemen. One, they've supported all of the UN resolutions that penalize Ansarullah, the resistance coalition government in northern Yemen. China has supplied drones to Saudi Arabia to kill Yemenis. China has looted Yemeni oil, using the Saudi puppet regime and its connections with the UAE stroke Israel to come into the south of Yemen and take the oil from the oil fields and not pay Ansarullah, not give them any benefit from their oil being taken, to the point where Ansarullah were actually threatening Chinese tankers. Now in Gaza, China is sending labor and is effectively, through a third party, invested in the Zionist settlement programs in the occupied territories. It's increased its investment in Haifa Port in May 2025. Haifa Port that receives weapons for the IOF. It's supplying drones that are then being modified by the Israelis to bomb Palestinians in Gaza. And neither Russia nor China, while they are vocally condemning it in the UN, have done anything to quarantine the Zionist entity. Nothing. They didn't veto Trump's continued genocide plan. They haven't taken a single strong stance, not only against Israel, but also increased their partnerships with Israel and with the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar to a lesser degree, but UAE and Saudi Arabia that are linked heavily. UAE is providing a land bridge and a rail bridge for Israel to circumnavigate the blockade of the Red Sea, for example. So my point is, whatever is being said publicly, you can actually pretty much ignore it, in my opinion, because the actions counter what they're saying in the public domain.
We are out of time, so I'd just like to thank our guests and also give them this opportunity to please tell our audience how they can follow your critical work.
All right, you can. Oh, go on. Sorry.
No. Okay. Well, okay, I'll go. You can follow me on Substack and under Fiorella Isabel. You can also follow me, Vanessa, on our podcast, Critical Perspectives, which we will be filming again after the Christmas New Year break. And you can also follow me on X at Fiorella Isabel.
Yeah, the same. And you can follow me. Substack's the main one. Everything gets republished back up there.
And that's Vanessa Beeley on Substack.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, the opinions you hear are ours and that of our guests, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. That wraps up our show for today. This is Uncontrolled Opposition. I'm Gloria Guillo, joined here by Professor Jeremy Kuzmarov. Remember to like and share our broadcast. Your kind support keeps us going. Please find us on Substack, Twitter X, and Podbeam. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you next week.
Okay, thanks, guys. I've got to run. I've got another appointment. So thanks. That was very interesting. Yeah, illuminating show. So appreciate your analysis.
Okay.
Thank
If you have
Thanks
any
for having me on.
final points, we're still
Take care.
live at this moment. Bye, Jeremy. We're still live at this moment. This is not part of the radio show.
Yep, that's right. And I do want to re-record one part with you, Gloria, during your monologue. Can you start with well, I mean, if you guys want to keep talking, go ahead and talk, and then we can do that afterwards.
Did you have any finishing points, Vanessa? Because
No, I was going to ask if you did.
okay. No, I mean, the last thing I wanted to say on Venezuela was a lot of the stuff like that's been out online is coming from people who have no ties to Venezuela. It's like random anonymous people on X that we don't know and are not followed or have anything to do with Venezuelan on the ground journalists or people close to the government. So I just wanted to say, like, make sure you're looking at the right information, following the right people, and getting your sources. Because yeah, I understand why, like, the initial shock of the situation of people seeing what happened to Maduro, trying to ask questions like how was he taken? Why was he taken this way? How was there no not a strong enough response? I agree with a lot of these questions. Like I have them as well, but I think rather you can make an analysis based on the information you have rather than just out of air. And I think a lot of what we're seeing is like the AI slop too with Grok and all this stuff, like really created a lot of fake videos, fake information, fake photos. And it's getting really hard for us to be able to differentiate between like what's actually real and what's not. And even yesterday I posted this video where somebody had created a trailer of using AI of what happened and how Maduro was taken. And it's really scary where we're entering this. And of course, Elon Musk has been bloating, and a lot of these American, elites and American journalists, U.S. American, have been gloating and talking about how great this is and how wonderful it is. And it's really enraging, yes, but also like we have to really look at that as propaganda war, as this sort of psychological warfare that's also being played on us. And as you said, Gloria, to try to diminish this idea that there is a resistance, to try to put the United States and Israel to a greater extent, because as Vanessa mentioned, Pax Judaica, this is where we're going. This is where we're headed, and it's a very dark world. And I think we have to be very careful to not get swallowed up by a lot of these things. Always question, but also question intelligently. Try to find the evidence to a lot of these things, and you're not going to. A lot of these people aren't going to know more than the people that are actually on the ground. So I would try to go to those people.
Yeah. I agree on that. I think the temptation, especially with social media, is this rush to judgment. And the first people to get any kind of semi-coherent theory out there about what happened, and then that gets picked up, and then we're actually kind of going counter to whatever that narrative is, and trying to decipher the information that's being put out. It kind of makes the job 100 times harder, to be honest. To some degree.
I mean, also just our emotional response. I mean, I woke up in the morning.
Yeah.
I mean, someone had sent me a text message that this happened. And I don't know, I sometimes wake up like 3, 4 in the morning, and I got this message that they kidnapped President Maduro. And it's shocking. It's just, it's a sucker punch. It hurts. When you see something like this, it's outrageous. And, I was like, well, what did Russia say? What did China say? What are they going to do? I was caught up in that. And, it's very emotional that you kind of want some savior, some amazing thing to come and right the world. I want aliens to come in, for God's sakes, and and fix the world. But this is not going to happen. And we have to be very sober, and we have to be very pragmatic in how we see the world. And I really appreciate you ladies coming on to reorient us and to keep us grounded and realistic, and understanding how the world works. It's not a fantasy. It's not an emotional reaction. This is geopolitics. And I really think you both express it brilliantly. And, I remain a huge fan of both of you. And I'm, really thrilled you came on our show today.
Oh,
Thank
thanks
you.
for having us.
And it's fun to have Fee as a guest on her own channel.
Yeah, we've glommed on to Fee's channel now.
Yeah, and this is a bit of a temporary thing, but we will be reposting this on Pasta to Go as well, so you could be watching it over there. Gloria, I would like you to re-record that last part of your monologue where you talked about de-dollarization.
Oh, okay. I tripped a lot there. Let's see what happened.
It wasn't a lot; it was just a little bit. But if you could, I think
So
it's near the very end.
All right, let's let our guests leave so they're not tortured through this.
All right.
So we're gonna say bye
Thank
to
you,
you.
Fiorella. Thank you, Vanessa. It was a great show.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
very much, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. Where's that section? I'm going through it. Okay.
You got it right.
I
but
got it.
when
Okay.
you-
All
when
right.
you stumbled,
Okay.
you like started giggling a little bit. I don't think the
Okay.
tone is going to be right if I edit that.
Yeah, it's a tongue twister. Okay. The petrodollar isn't being defended. It's being given last rights. President Maduro's imprisonment won't stop de-dollarization. At best, it will only slow it down. The weaponization of the dollar is coming to an end, whether Washington wants to admit it or not. Thank you.
Yep, that'll work. All right.
It's so nice to get a second chance. This monologue is a mouthful
No, I know.
in one take. Thank you, Jamie. I
But
appreciate
it's
your
it's a
patience with
good,
me.
it's usually good. Like I usually put like a lot of the effort and editing on your monologue to make sure that it goes really smooth. And then
I think Jeremy's mic was on because I heard coughing and
yeah, normally
I was like,
I
oh
mute it,
no.
but because I was trying to run 2 shows today.
Oh right. Yeah, you're
So
being split
I
in pieces here. You got
yeah,
pasta
but
going at the
then
same time.
Pasta had to cancel at the last second
Oh
because
no.
of his
Yeah.
friend. That's sad.
I'll
But
reach out to him and see what's going on.
yeah, he's trying to scramble to get plane tickets right now. So anyhow, that's not here nor there for this show. But everybody who's been watching, thank you so much. This is Uncontrolled Opposition, normally presented by Pasta to Go, but today we had to shift things around a little bit. That's why you're watching us on the Truth Wire. And we're going to start our own YouTube channel and put Uncontrolled Opposition on that channel. So stay tuned for that.
But we have to build up our audience because we're coming
we're
away.
still going to broadcast.
I think we'll be on Truthwire for a little bit, right?
Yeah, we will. I think we're still going to broadcast in both places, but we'll
we're all good buddies here.
Yeah, we'll stay with we're going to have its own channel moving forward. So everybody, thank you for watching. This has been I think it's been a really good show, and the Venezuela BRICS multipolarism thing is something that we all need to keep an eye on. And while I know a lot of us aren't happy with Russia and China's behavior right now, you also got to remember that China looks at things in terms of centuries, not quarters, not annual quarters. So they're very patient, and I think they look at what we're doing as typical imperialist behavior that's running ourselves into the ground, and they're just going to sit back and let us do it. That's what I think their strategy is. So but depending on how aggressive we get, the rest of the world might have to stand up against us. I mean, they might not be able to sit back. So we'll see. Hopefully it doesn't get to that, but that's where things can lead with this situation. Anyway, everybody, thank you for watching. And we'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Jeremy. And have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.